Live in a constant state of fear and misery. Don't youngest me anymore. Live in a constant state of fear and misery. Live in a constant state of fear and misery. Don't youngest me anymore.
Hello, everybody. Today is Thursday, December 20th, and we're bringing you Block Digest 148 at block height 554,660. What is up?
Man, yeah, I don't know. It's a warm winter, and it's almost Christmas. Just getting through with the winter crypto party and all this stuff going on. It's been busy, man. Lots of interesting stuff going on. But how are you doing today, Janine?
Well, I have been reunited with one of my favorite books, which I haven't seen in about a year, so I'm pretty happy about that, because now I can read it again. And it's the Lauren Isley.
It's always nice to forget those stories so you can enjoy them
What?
again.
What women write books?
Lauren, well, Shinobi, surprise, surprise, Lauren Isley is a man. So
there you go, assuming people's gender again, getting in trouble, man.
Yeah, it's not Lauren as in L-A-U-R. It's Lauren as in L-O-R-E-N. Yeah.
A couple of those guys around Twitter. You should know that.
So back
if I was on Twitter right now, I would have just got banned.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you would have gotten banned on a bunch of social networks. I'm kind of surprised you haven't been.
That's why we're all moving over to Gab, right? I need to get a Gab. I don't have a.
I do have to say something. Whenever I see someone tagging Brian Armstrong on Twitter, my first thought is that they're actually, because he has Brian Trolls, and it's like, so the first thought whenever I see Brian Armstrong's tag is that it's you.
Bird, mateys.
It's been an interesting morning for Coinbase and Coinbase on Twitter, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But there's been some other interesting company that we haven't talked about in a while that's doing something very interesting. What's that going on, Shinobi?
Well, this is something I've been waiting for quite a while. And honestly, a little bit of a callback to when this show first got started, honestly. This was the first story we ever covered when the first part of Blockstream satellite link went live.
Yep. And that was so long ago that I was not even in the show yet.
By a margin of like a
I was
few
in the
episodes.
background.
But yeah, this was that was the first thing we ever covered when Chris Ellis coaxed me, HKEX. I think was that it, the first episode?
No, dude, it was like
shortly after Rick.
Start me out. Like if you go back to that first episode, there's like 10 people on the panel.
Yeah. And you had your monkey avatar.
Yeah, he got us rolling along, and Rick and Janine joined us very shortly after, and we have been full steam ahead ever since. And now the second part of the network is live, bringing coverage to the entire world except for Greenland, Antarctica, and a very small section of the Middle East, Russia, and the edge of Eastern Europe. But aside from those areas, the entire rest of the world can now receive the Bitcoin blockchain through Blockstream satellite feed. And this is pretty fucking awesome because this phase has brought coverage to two countries with over 1 billion people, China and India, and more importantly, two countries that to differing degrees are moving very, very quickly in a entirely anti-Bitcoin direction. So depending on how fast the slide down that steep hill goes, this could very much give people a private, stealthy way to actually continue being a validated peer on the network, despite the legislation that their different jurisdictions seem intent on passing in the long term. And so this is a pretty huge development, despite what a lot of people out there who don't want to tinker around with a satellite dish might think. I mean, with this kind of relay mechanism, it is literally impossible to see whether somebody is receiving the blockchain with it, unless you literally want to go around and knock on the door of every single person who has a satellite dish on the outside of their house. And given that India and China, the two countries I'm speaking of, again, have a population of over 1 billion people each, that is absolutely not a feasible course of action to take whatsoever. So with these satellite links, they are truly, if an individual chooses to continue participating in the Bitcoin network, impossible to shut out of it, regardless of whatever legislation or action that their government decides to take. And so that's just a pretty fucking awesome thing. But the real cherry on the top here, and what I really want to talk about, is the new feature that they are going to be bringing to the satellite feed, hopefully by January 2019. And that is a broadcast mechanism through an API that accepts payments for the bandwidth in Lightning Network. So this is really a very hardcore cypherpunk thing that they've been talking about for quite a while. But the API would allow you to make payments over Lightning Network to broadcast small messages down the satellite feed. And this has a lot of interesting applications. So just to kind of dissect the uses in two, you can broadcast clear text messages to literally everybody receiving the satellite feed. So you can do global broadcast messaging for things like, as Chris Cook from Blockstream points out, natural disaster notifications. You can do market data feeds, even potentially like other things like weather forecasts for areas that are not well connected and plugged in a way that makes information like that accessible. And you can also encrypt a message so that despite being broadcast to everybody receiving the feed, it will only be decryptable and readable by the person with the private key matching that public key it's encrypted to. And that offers a very interesting use case in that this is a communication mechanism that, if used properly, is literally impossible to set up a social graph of. Like using Lightning Network, which is onion routed, the payment is obscured so that Blockstream is unaware of who's actually paying for the message. If relayed properly over Tor or through a chain of proxies, the actual source of the message itself is impossible to determine. And given the fact that, again, this is a broadcast, medium, you have absolutely no idea who is even listening to the feed, let alone who actually has the private key necessary to decrypt an encrypted message broadcast over this. And Blockstream has absolutely no idea what the contents of the message are, given that it's encrypted. So this is literally, at least to my limited knowledge, probably when it launches, one of the most private ways to actually communicate with people. And I think the real interesting thing going forward after this launches is going to be how a market develops for this. because the big constraint with the satellite feed here is the limited amount of bandwidth. So it really has a very similar dynamic to block space, and especially in terms of how the price will be reflected by the demand. It is almost the exact same dynamic as a fee market. If there is little to no demand for actually utilizing bandwidth to broadcast messages, then the price will remain very cheap. But if demand picks up heavily, then that price per byte of data relayed through this mechanism will adjust itself in the exact same way that fees to get into a block do. And so, like, it's really an interesting thing to think about, you know, a literal market pricing private communications to this degree. And really, based on the overall amount of demand, it could potentially, if widely used, even make sense for Blockstream to spend extra money to get more bandwidth and throughput for this broadcast mechanism to kind of lower the price a little bit. And there's a little more leeway in terms of how that market can be tweaked a little bit, given that it's not, you know, tweaking with the security parameters of a global decentralized money. And, you know, I'm really excited to see this. And especially, like, you know, the most important part about this isn't necessarily just that Blockstream isn't able to see what the contents of the message are. It's that you cannot construct a social graph of who is talking to who with people using this medium, which is one of the core problems when you're talking about encrypted communications on the internet. Like, it's very simple nowadays to, you know, talk through encrypted channels with people, but the big problem is that there's still metadata showing that social graph of who is talking to who. And that's, while not necessarily divulging the contents of the message, it still gives information for people surveilling those communicating to use to undermine the privacy that people are trying to achieve. And, you know, kind of jokingly, at least my first thought when I saw the announcement that this was actually going to be rolled out after New Year's is the European Union with their impending copyright directive banning memes. Well, good luck stopping people from proliferating memes through the European Union, because I absolutely guarantee you that no matter what the price is, there will be some 4chan trolls willing to pay it just to spam memes into the continent of Europe.
Yeah, man, it's incredible to think about all the different possibilities that can come from this, and different sort of constructions of business models built around the ability to use this infrastructure. I mean, plus it's just so good to see, I mean, like, really improvements on privacy whenever we've seen privacy degraded for years, decades, and to sort of see, like, you know, with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and now we've just seen things like, you know, Blockstream and, you know, the satellite, and I mean, also other guys like, you know, what Nopar's doing with coin joins, and the Samurai guys are doing with these node implementations, and that NIM network. There's just all these different privacy enhancing features coming down in the future, which it's really important. I mean, like you're saying, I mean, like this area that they're covering now, Asia, I mean, we've done these stories on China for a long time now, and India is starting to look the exact same way, where, you know, people could be monitoring these areas and trying to get individuals in trouble for using the network. But I mean, now that they have these systems, they can, you know, obfuscate themselves in the crowd, and they can still get access to download the blockchain and send a transaction through with without using any of the country's infrastructure. I mean, this is huge in you know, not just privacy and secure messaging and stuff, but I see this like you know, like they were saying, as far as getting information out about natural disasters. You know, I was in Katrina and all that stuff, and like one of the major problems there was just like when everything went down, the communication fell apart, and that entire city became rumors for almost 2 weeks before eventually enough people came trickling in, giving us information about things that are happening outside of New Orleans and the spread of the problem, to where we finally started recognizing like the scope of the situation we were in. And, not only was communication broke down within the disaster area, but all the information coming out of the disaster area was very controlled for a reason, because there was a lot of stuff going on in these disaster moments. It's like, it's like a little bit like combat. It's a fluid situation. There's things going on that maybe they don't want to report on, and maybe, people need information on this stuff. Like I've said before, I mean, there was an order about shoot to kill on, people that were looting on certain areas of the city. And, those people didn't have the information within that city of like, hey, if you keep doing what you're doing, some army guys are going to show up down the street with some weapons and they're going to put you down. And I mean, maybe if there was a secure message way to get in there whenever all the power's out, and it's a system to sort of help these disaster areas whenever they're going through a situation like this. I mean, I think that could be incredibly powerful to allow an area to be robust enough to make it through a natural disaster that could wipe out their communications for a couple of weeks to a couple of months. I mean, like for Puerto Rico, we've seen them power out for like a year. I mean, and like people pulling generators to get power out there. I mean, like, I think that robust feature that the satellite adds will be big, but it'll kind of be like a model that's hard to show up. It's kind of like the spread of mesh networks. It's like unless there's a proper incentive, you don't really see it being developed and built out. But I'm hopeful that, we'll have some of this tech built out to where whenever one of these disasters do hit the area, maybe we'll see an organization kind of come to the area and say like, okay, we have all this software and, that we use for redundancy within the Bitcoin network, but this is going to be, priority infrastructure within this area, because right now you don't have anything. So, I mean, like, that's where I could see this being huge.
Mm-hmm. I mean, another use that I've been considering is for whistleblowers. I mean, this would potentially allow somebody to be much more slow moving and cautious in distributing encrypted data and ensuring that that's redundantly held by a number of different parties, and then drop a decryption key through this communications network with no real metadata footprint to figure out who actually had that key and where it came from. Like you could, it's like you could take the extra steps in actually getting the encrypted files out there, knowing that there's a way to much more thoroughly cover your tracks when you drop the key to actually decrypt and access it. And like the one like real shitty thing about this though is just the throughput is kind of limited. So it's something more for short messages or broadcasts that are going to be valuable for a large number of people, like something, like a disaster notification or a price feed. That's something you pay for once and you don't have to pay when more people actually receive it or, set up a dish to get it. And, one of the first thoughts I had kind of very naively when I saw this, the more I looked into it, was compressing data. And that would work for unencrypted messages. So anything that you're trying to broadcast to everybody, you could compress to save space in the feed. But as far as anything that's encrypted to only be accessible by one person or a small group of people, it's not really a viable option, because encryption algorithms either one, they don't really create a lot of savings because there isn't really much patterns in encrypted data to optimize and compress. And two, when you're dealing with encrypted data, there's also the potential for encrypting something to actually undermine and weaken the encryption. So by attempting to compress something that you encrypted, you could actually destroy the privacy, and people who aren't intended to read it could actually access it. So it kind of sucks as far as like the entire market pricing dynamic of this, that, you know, being more efficient with data use, it's without some kind of improvement in, you know, a compression algorithm, that's really going to be only accessible for publicly available information. But I mean, that's what's going to kind of be interesting to this in my mind, is to see really like what will the market price that level of privacy at, because I don't think we've ever seen any kind of mechanism to really put a number on something concretely like that before. And now we will actually have like something that will price that.
Yeah, like I'm saying, I mean, it's good to see swings going back in the opposite direction, from the degrading of privacy to, you know, enhanced privacy and security, to where, you know, I would imagine there's a high market demand for that nowadays. But Janine, do you have any comment on these topics?
Yeah, I think it's great because I mean, the main benefit to me is, or the main benefit I see is more to do with censorship resistant. Well, wait, are we still in the satellites? We're
Yeah,
still
we're
in
on
the
the
satellite part.
satellites. Yeah.
Okay, because I saw there was a second Blockstream story. Sorry. Um, yeah, the main benefit I see is about censorship resistance, and that's like this kind of project is one of the main reasons why we try to keep the block size as small as possible, because, you know, having you can't do huge block sizes with these satellite distribute or satellite broadcasts. Maybe we'll in the future, but at the moment they have to be kept small, so that, like, the point of them is that it allows accessibility to countries where they don't have a lot of internet access. So it would kind of defeat the purpose of, you know, giving them access through these satellite broadcasts if they, you know, could do that because the blocks were too large. So yeah.
Yeah, hopefully one day they'll be so small they can bounce off the ionosphere, according to Zabo and crew. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I haven't actually, because I remember Zabo and Elaine giving a presentation about into that, and I haven't actually seen an update from them. Has there been an update about their work with regards to the satellite stuff?
I haven't heard anything yet either, but I imagine it does have to do with, like, can we get the block size down small enough? Like, so maybe they are working on some different implementation or something that we don't know about yet.
Alrighty though. Next up in Blockstream land is something from Peter Woolley and Greg Maxwell. So Peter recently dropped an open source library for set reconciliation. And Bitcoin Magazine recently published an article where he talked to Greg and Peter about this to a degree and what it was really relevant for in Bitcoin. And this is a huge development in terms of resource usage on the network level. So we've had a technique for a while now called inverted Bloom lookup tables, which is kind of like the opposite of a Bloom filter that's used for set reconciliation. But the issue is with that, it's not really that efficient until you start getting into very large sets. And so this Minisketch algorithm, which they've implemented in Minisketch for Bitcoin, is pretty efficient even with very small differences in a set. And the whole idea with set reconciliation is, instead of kind of running through each piece of data in the whole set of data, you can kind of sum them together and just find differences. and actually figure out who has what and who doesn't have what to fill in the gaps for different participants' data sets without using so much bandwidth going through the entire set. And what this is going to be used for in Bitcoin, at least first off, is transaction. Because right now, how the peer-to-peer protocol works is you effectively send a message with an individual transaction ID and go, do you have this? And if they respond no, you send the transaction. And that eats up a lot of bandwidth. I mean, I think according to Greg, 87% of a node's bandwidth right now is effectively transaction relays. And so with this Minisketch proposal and the invertible Bloom lookup tables that have already been known for a very long time in computer science, this would create a way to reconcile even just small set differences between individual nodes mempools and very big set differences efficiently in both cases, and potentially drop node bandwidth use by a factor of something like 40 times. And so this would allow nodes to operate actually relaying transactions and not just with blocks only, with much less bandwidth usage. And as well, one of the things that Greg's looking at in terms of this optimization is instead of just dropping the net bandwidth use for a node, you could actually use this extra bandwidth to connect to more peers and give your node much more redundancy in terms of its peer connection through the network, which would make a number of different Sybil attacks and partition attacks much more expensive to pull off. And so, the nice thing about this is this isn't really a consensus change. So this is not any kind of thing where we have to get into a shit fit like with SegWit or the UASF. There's absolutely nothing contentious that could come of this. You either choose to use this protocol, in which case you can use it with any other peers that also choose to use it, or you don't, and you simply use legacy protocols to interact with another peer. And it really goes to show, there's still a lot of optimization and improvements that can be made with Bitcoin, and not just at the consensus or script level. Like there's still shit tons of inefficiencies to weed out and improve. A number of different ways that you can offer lower costs to actually participate in the network. And not all of them are consensus changes that everybody needs to get up in a hoo-ha about or care whether or not people use. I mean, it's kind of like the Lightning Network. Like if people want to make changes or improvements to Lightning going forward, that's not going to involve any kind of consensus risk to the network. That's not going to have to be something that people necessarily move very slow and cautiously with, because it's not part of the core consensus layer. And even like layer one aspects of Bitcoin, there are many things to do and improve that aren't consensus critical. And, it's, yeah.
But it's like, it's like one of the great pieces about open sourcing stuff is like you can hopefully grab people that put new eyes on things and find efficiencies. And it's one of the reasons why I'm out there doing these meetups and running through, a lot of these blockchain meetups too, is, to hopefully grab some people to where maybe they, just sort of looked past Bitcoin when they first came in, and they can, maybe now take a second look at it and think about, hey, maybe there's an efficiency here for me to find and sort of cut my teeth in this space and make a name for myself. And, it's it's kind of sad. I mean, I had a Bitcoin engineering discussion last night, and it was just me and two other guys. And it was an interesting discussion. We had a very interesting talk, but we went across the street after that, and because there was a blockchain meetup, and there must have been like 50 people there. So, there's a stark divide between people that sort of, dig into the technical aspects and sort of new ways to find efficiencies. But I mean, this is definitely one of those where, yeah, when you look at it, it's just like, yeah, there really shouldn't be any hangups with this as much as like, this is just an efficiency to help sync nodes and, get the mempools working together. I mean, like I was even thinking, I wonder if this could help out with fee estimation across wallets and things like that. But, it's always great to see these new efficiencies worked out. I mean, they're usually always by, some guys like Maxwell and Peter Woolley. So, hopefully some more people jump into the space and start seeing like, okay, I can maybe find something here that others haven't really looked at. And maybe we'll see some new guys making a name for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And Greg's even potentially talking about using this to improve block relay, but it's not really something that would make much material difference to a node over an internet connection. With compact blocks, I think he says there's only 4 megabytes for block relay per node per day if you're actually also relaying transactions so that you can actually make use of compact blocks. But he is kind of looking at this potentially as a way to improve bandwidth usage on the Blockstream satellite. So something where bandwidth usage is actually, very important down to each byte that you can save.
Yeah, I mean, like we were just saying, I mean, that bandwidth issue is like one of the major reasons why the whole scaling debate was such a big issue. And, that comes down to technical arguments. And like I'm saying, a lot of people look past the technical aspects and just say, oh, well, that's interesting, but I like this. And so hopefully people will start catching up on this whenever they see, like we're saying, people using this to help actually build use cases that people haven't had the capabilities of in the past, like we were talking about with natural disasters and privacy and all that. But was there anything else you guys want to add to this before we get into some not so major technical developments?
Nope.
All right. So you guys know what punching bag it is, Coinbase. And so, yeah, it looks like Coinbase is trying to be a little bit of high tech themselves with all this massive altcoins they've decided to support. We know from a lot of events we've covered in the past, there's been many different vectors of attack surface where some of these networks have suffered, some of these smaller networks and coins have suffered. And most recently, we covered the 51% attacks on Vertcoin and BGold and other networks of similar size. But there has been many bugs in the past on these networks where people were using best practices to secure their private keys to find themselves at a loss because of an unexposed bug. So now that Coinbase has made this business plan, they have to come up with a secure way to store all these coins. This news made headlines because of the sheer volume of these coins. I mean, totaling some $5 billion. Now, according to Coinbase, the migration included 5% of all Bitcoin, 8% of all Ethereum, and 25% of all Litecoin in circulation, which, that fact's a little scary. It's one of those where if we added Digital Currencies Group's most recent exposed holdings from those market buys we saw not too long ago, they have a total of 1% of the Bitcoin supply. So that's 6% without Circle's holdings. And we know these three companies work together to lobby DC, and all of them share this altcoinery. Now, while their percentage of the Bitcoin network is relatively low compared to the amount of other networks they hold, it still shows the example of how these companies or possible ETFs in the future could become influential just from their level of holdings, which is the reason we are seeing them make these moves like this with trying to develop a secure way to store these altcoins. So Philip Martin, Coinbase's head of security, told CoinDesk, quote, "This was fundamentally new architecture from the ground up, and that regulators and auditors were involved at every stage. One of the biggest things we were worried about is that we don't move the market with this event, which is why we went to such lengths to coordinate with regulators and manage media speculation around the movements." So the process of this transfer started back in October, and they are using a technique called Shamir's secret sharing, which splits their private keys into a bunch of different chunks. And Martin said that there's a threshold splitting system because you can define a threshold by less than the total number of pieces that are sufficient to reconstruct the original. So sounds like, so these pieces are put in different secure geographical locations that only move the coins when multiple Coinbase employees work together over the phone. And sounds kind of like the other secure storage custodial models we've heard in the past. However, I think those were only limited to Bitcoin because, like I was saying, just the storage of your private keys isn't the only risk. And, what if someone freezes the funds like we've seen in Parity, or 51% attacks the network and double spends those coins? I don't know. To me, this all could be for naught, but good luck to them trying to store these alts. As much as I don't really care for Coinbase, I also don't like seeing people get hurt. Anyway, CoinDesk goes on to detail out this process of key sharding is the same process BitGo is using to securely store their assets, which we know they were recently awarded that custodial license in South Dakota. So BitGo's VP of Product Marketing, Robin Vanderosa, said BitGo and Coinbase follow similar reporting and compliance strategies, which could open the door for both companies to add support for new assets and policies in the following months. They are using every possible official route to do their, well, this isn't the quote anymore. So they're using every possible official route to do their due diligence with regulators. And Coinbase and BitGo want a one-size-fits-all measure for all these assets. As Martin goes on to explain, quote, when you're dealing with 5 billion of crypto based on asset prices at that time, we can't change the process as we go. You want to do it in a way works every time. We think it's critical to our ability to serve a broad spectrum of assets out there as they come online. So here's some confirmation that Coinbase is just going to keep Coinbasing for the foreseeable future. But this is just one story and 3 on Coinbase. But do you guys have anything to say about this particular aspect of Coinbase's new secure storage for altcoins?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really knock a company for trying to improve cold storage mechanisms. And, I've said multiple times, at least the original version of cold storage they had set up for Bitcoin is very solid and probably one of the only good things you can say about the company. But I think really the more interesting bit of information from this happening is the fact that they literally have 25% of the entire Litecoin supply. And I mean, compare that with the 8% of Bitcoin that they have, which even that, I think, is really something to worry about with that level of concentration, given the economic influence on consensus that creates. They're literally a quarter of the entire Litecoin supply. That is how much economic influence they have over the consensus on the Litecoin network. Like, that's absurd.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was looking at that too. And I mean, we know Litecoin really blew up last year whenever they listed it. And it was one of those first, first major listings where, we saw just like the access to it, people blew that thing up with volume. So I imagine, it's just like the greatest percentage of people holding Litecoin probably purchased it off Coinbase. And, it's not to say that they've really decided to move those keys out, but it was 5% of the Bitcoin network, 8% of ETH. So it's even smaller than 8%, luckily. But it is still right.
Like, even that, I say, is too much.
Yeah, that's where it's like it's going to be good whenever we really start seeing the Lightning Network take off and a lot of more adoption where people are just grabbing Bitcoin and spending it and using it as it's intended and, in their way. I mean, there's a lot of people that just need it to store value and transfer value across generations and such. I mean, but there's definitely this big use case of, censorship, medium of exchange, and how exactly we're going to get that all into everybody's hands. I mean, it's I could tell you from being here on the ground here, there's a lot of interesting ideas, and I mean, like it could be, you know, kind of wildfire as far as like if an industry picks this up and uses it as its back end, and then next thing you know, a bunch of employees and other businesses are accepting it, and you have people coming in and out of the system using it on a regular basis, and you know, we could spread out these percentages of the network to where, you know, you don't want anybody holding too much to have influence in the future. But yeah, let's go right into this other development with Coinbase. So yeah, I'll admit I haven't fully been able to dive into this yet. I did a lot of diving into that previous story and just trying to dig into a bunch of stuff that happened last night. We'll get into later. So but it appears that Coinbase purchase of earn.com. Wait a minute. I don't even think I wrote this out right. Okay, so Coinbase purchased earn.com a while back and is trying to use the platform to help educate the public about their assets. And quick recap on earn.com. They used to be 21Co, and they made that little home miner you're supposed to be able to plug up, and kind of got the label of buttbox. But they pivoted to earn.com to pay users for completing small tasks. And recently, Coinbase purchased the company for $100 million. And as I remember, it sounded more like a talent acquisition, but it looks like they are really planning on using this platform. So relaunched as Coinbase Earn in an initial phase of invite only to learn about these assets they plan to support, the first being the 0x project, which is interesting because those guys are local to the area here on the Front Range. And, you know, we've seen most of these guys that work on that protocol kind of move on to other projects since the SEC made that statement about Ether Delta and 0x possibly being an unregistered security. So anyway, since that statement from the SEC came down, I think they're trying to build a utility for the 0x token by saying they'll reward people in it for learning about their asset. I'm not sure on that, just a guess, but I'm interested to know what they say the 0x project offers, like through this learning program. I mean, like they're going to be paying you in 0x and you're going to be learning about 0x. So imagine like somewhere in there, they're going to say like, this is a token made for helping pay to complete tasks as far as educating yourself about what they plan on listing. But yeah, maybe one of those invite only people can let us know what they say about that. But now this whole announcement stirred up some controversy on Twitter, and I imagine you guys have a lot to say on the subject. But yeah, I just wasn't able to dig that deep into this story. But I mean, you know, it's basically just that earn.com is actually going to be something that Coinbase plans to leverage in order to help people learn about what they plan on listing. But yeah, it just sounds like so much altcoinery. What do you think, man?
Yeah, as far as education, I call bullshit. This is going to turn into nothing but a giant propaganda funnel to brainwash new people in this ecosystem into lapping up all of the shitcoin nonsense. This is going to completely misrepresent the reality of scalability, of smart contracts, of exactly how those things interact with an oracle. It's going to just tell people that completely pointless shit is some magical new utility that can bring so much value to the world. It's not going to educate a goddamn person. It's going to fill their head with horse shit that's going to lead them into dumping money into completely dead-end projects and give them a few fucking shekels in the beginning to go, ooh, look at this new coin I have. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the long term, it winds up being a way to just airdrop shit coins into Coinbase holders' wallets to take that another step further. Like trying to paint this as some kind of educational resource to the community is horseshit. It's trying to put blinders over people's eyes so that Coinbase can dump their bags on their customers' heads. It's complete horseshit.
Yeah, I would say like one of the bigger problems when it comes to education in this space. I mean, because I do it on the ground here, you know, try to speak to people, and there's just a lot of misinformation, and it's one of those where you could fall down a rabbit hole in the wrong direction, and then you kind of dig your heels in through an emotional incentive that you made by purchasing something. And, it really does become a huge distraction. And it's one of those where, I understand they're trying to do this to all kind of please the SEC to where this token won't have some issues going forward. But I don't know. Yeah, to me, it just seems like they're just trying to come up with some use case that's going to sort of feed their idea of like what they see this ecosystem being built out to be, which it's just a big disappointment. I know, like on Twitter, they were talking about, Brian Armstrong used to talk about Bitcoin, and then you look at it now, and it's just like he doesn't even talk about it. And so then he just had the snarky tweet of Bitcoin, just like, oh well, now we're ingratiated back by Brian Armstrong because he tweeted Bitcoin. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's been a few initiatives that have tried to do this in the past where they pay people in a cryptocurrency in order to learn some other topic unrelated to cryptocurrencies or about cryptocurrencies themselves. And like it from a business perspective, it just doesn't make sense to, if you're going to do this kind of thing, to start off someone about something other than one of the actual popular usable cryptocurrencies. Like if you're going to do this at all, you should be choosing between Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum. Like even if we don't like them, you should that's the default. You should be choosing one that actually has users, that has a user base, that has been around for a while. I still don't know what 0x is. Like if I don't know what it is, most people who are not even in the space don't know what it is, and they're not going to benefit from learning about it because at the end of the day, if there are any of them, it's going to be one of the top, not even by market cap, but just the ones that are used by a lot of more people. So it would make much more like if they were actually looking at this from a rational business perspective, they would choose between Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, even Monero. It has the differentiation with privacy, but it doesn't make sense to do a token unless the whole point of doing an educational course on one token as the focus and not at least just including it maybe as a mention in a larger presentation about cryptocurrencies in general, is obviously because they have some kind of relationship with the developers or the whatever development community or something like that.
They do.
Because they do. That's what I was getting to, is that this is about promoting a token, and it doesn't really have any educational benefit at this point because that they really actually need at this point, especially people who don't have as many options in terms of the financial system. They don't need to be taught about 0x. They need to be taught about things that they can actually use, that benefit their life, that make their life less hard. This is not what's going to help them.
Yeah, 0x is a token to build dexes on top of. Why you need a token is nonsense. That they actually bought one of the biggest dexes using this protocol, Paradex, which is now a subsidiary of Coinbase. Two of their ex-employees were deeply involved in the 0x ICO and actually shilling it to people. And as we've seen with the recent Ether Delta case with the SEC, they've declared that running an order book, which is a necessity because you can't do a decentralized order books, makes you liable for being an unregistered securities exchange if you are trading a token deemed to be a security. So there's literally absolutely no point for 0x or anything built on top of it, because if it's not a security, then they can just list it on Coinbase. And if it is, then it doesn't matter that they've shielded themselves with this subsidiary company. They're liable. This is just them, like, again. And I'll read a tweet. I actually got into a huge thread about whether Coinbase was a net negative or positive on the ecosystem. And here's something that Nick Carter said in this thread. I, in person, witnessed Coinbase executives lobbying regulators with lies like China controls Bitcoin, proof of work is an environmental disaster, and pushing USDC instead. and inviting heavy regulations which will cull all competitors. Like, Coinbase is a malicious piece of shit that is doing everything they can to undermine Bitcoin and actual censorship resistant systems in this ecosystem, and just push bullshit that they have control over while trying to establish regulatory capture for themselves. They should be fucking chased out of this ecosystem and burned to the ground, because they are absolutely doing nothing at this point except trying to undermine everything we are all trying to do.
Yeah, man, it's really upsetting to where, you know, like them just pushing USDC and this 0x and saying, like, you know, all those, just pushing those terrible narratives that don't really follow any of the facts, and to see them pivot like this from, you know, where they used to be. And, you know, it really is just so blatantly obvious, because I think Janine made a good point. Like, if you were going to actually launch a program where you were trying to educate the public about, you know, these different cryptocurrencies, you would want to at least do the education on some of those that have made some of the biggest advancements, as far as like a timeline and, you know, sort of working through different problems and how they came about those answers or solutions, or, you know, the way that they plug the holes until they, until it keeps going. I mean, you know, at least with Ethereum, like, I'm seeing these guys in the blockchain meetups, you know, just sort of like talk about, you know, these new scaling solutions that are coming in January that they're supposed to be forking into the Ethereum code base. And it's really interesting because of the fact that they just, you know, they sort of relabel the Lightning Network and, you know, the ability to do channel states, they call it. And I mean, like, if they did actually learn some of these things, they could see that, like, these other coins are just sort of replicating some of the technology that Bitcoin's created and put together in a novel way to make sure that the system is all still accountable and secure. And, you know, that's just like, yeah, I mean, like, let's educate them about some token that got issued late last year that's trying to be a decentralized exchange, or the stable coin for decentralized exchanges. And, you know, this is where it's like, I see this as like, yeah, it's sort of stalling progress on what eventually will become like regional currencies. I mean, like, these stable coins and everything, I think that, you know, eventually we'll see them, you know, like, kind of people step up and say, like, look, we're not going to use USDC. We'll create, you know, our own, you know, stable coin that we can operate with, that we trust, because, you know, we're doing the governance on it. And, but that's a lot of speculation from my end. Let's just get the last part of this. Or here, I'm sorry, Janine, do you have something else to say on this one?
I just want to preserve it in the show. Audio Video Tweaker said that Brian Armstrong should now be known as Weak Hand.
I also saw Brian Scamstrong. I like that one too.
I like Weak Hand because it implies that he's like, he doesn't hodl.
That's true. Definitely the weak hand. I mean, like, all this altcoinery is just like very evident of that. The last story, really not much to it. Also, kind of just didn't have that much time to dig into it, but there's really not that much to say other than, like, they started adopting, you know, crypto to crypto on their traditional exchange. Like, I mean, they did have this sort of option for Coinbase Pro, which was GDAX, to where, you know, you could trade one asset for another. But, you know, now they're allowing that on their traditional platform, where people just go to the Coinbase website. Used to be you would have to purchase and then send to some other website to do the transfer from one crypto to another, similar to like Polo. Or it just seems like they're trying to be more like, yeah, Polo was bought by you know, Circle, which is doing USDC, and Coinbase is running Coinbase Pro, which they'll probably just phase into what is their Coinbase trading platform that will be Polo 2.0 or something. I mean, that's what it looks like. So, you know, we have this, yeah, all this story about, you know, basically the cold storage for altcoins, building out a altcoin education system, and allowing more crypto to crypto trades on their exchanges with more of these altcoins. So Coinbase, you know, and Brian Scamstrong, or We Can, that's what we'll label you from now on. Just tweeting Bitcoin is not going to re-ingratiate yourself with what this community is trying to do. And I think you pretty much just like blazed past your opportunity to even try and do that. So congratulations on being with the likes of Roger Ver and Jahan. Sorry, but that was all I really had to say. Other than that, so did you guys have anything else left to say on Coinbase? Yeah, it's alt to alt, right? That's what I was saying. Crypto to crypto.
Okay, so one correction, Audio Video Tweaker didn't actually say we can. That was my brain translating it. It was actually numb hand, but let's continue.
All right, yeah. That's enough of ripping the shreds Coinbase and all that stuff. So yeah, let's continue on. We got quite a few more stories today.
Oh, is it my turn? Okay. So my first story, we talked about the implications of U.S. unsanctions. I'm calling them unsanctions now. You'll have to watch prior shows to understand why. Against Iran over the last few weeks. And one of the effects that has surfaced recently is that Iranian students living in the UK, I'm sure that they probably have similar problems in the US and probably other European countries as well, but in particular in the UK, a lot of banks are increasingly denying them services for being from Iran or Iranian descent, and they're having trouble getting, just living in general. But they also particularly have trouble getting the thousands of pounds that are necessary to afford university tuition, to the point where at least one university, called Reading, has instructed at least one of their students to go home to Iran over the Christmas holiday and try to bring back thousands of pounds worth of cash. I think it was like 5,300 pounds worth of cash when he returns after Christmas. And I just find like that suggestion so ridiculous for a number of reasons. First of all, for people who have never had to bring any large sum of cash over any border, you can't even imagine how nerve-wracking that can be, even if you're doing everything by the book, because it's not only hard to leave most countries through an airport with a lot of cash, but once you enter your destination country, you're going to be asked a lot of questions about the source of those funds and what are you doing with them, and you have to do some of them actually ask you for like proof of source of funds. So people who travel over the border a lot with sums of cash for whatever reason usually have to bring like a bank statement or something where they got it from, or some kind of document saying, where the money came from and how they acquired it. Also, because the student who is featured in this article that I read from The Guardian, Parsa Sadat, I think, I'm probably skewing the name, but he's only 23 years old. Not only a pretty cold thing for a university to tell a 23-year-old, basically give them an ultimatum that if they can't overcome the unfair restrictions on their ability to participate in the economy through no fault of their own, that they will be forced out of their educational track for lack of funds. But it's also pretty irresponsible of them to instruct someone to bring large amounts of cash over the border and potentially put him in a stressful border incident if he doesn't know how to do it properly. Because I would anticipate that probably a lot of people would be like, okay, go home to my family, get a bunch of cash, put it in a bag, and then try to travel through the airport. And then, they get asked, well, where'd this money come from? Are you like he'll get accused of money laundering or something. But as far as I can tell from the article, they didn't mention whether they gave him any of those precautions. Didn't. And so it's not surprising that if, he's not the only student getting these kinds of instructions, according to the editor of IranWire.com, whose last name is Bahari. Some Iranian students in the UK had started using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin in an attempt to circumvent the banking restrictions. So basically, the banking restrictions are because of the sanctions, which neither of them are, through any fault of these or anything. It's all to do with the sanctions and the concerns that banks probably have about dealing with any Iranian person, and whether providing them with financial services will somehow violate those sanctions, even in another country that has nothing to do with the US, or at least in this case has nothing to do with the US. And of course, even using Bitcoin is a bit risky because it means that his family back in Tehran and other families in Iran have to still circumvent the ban that was imposed by the Iranian government there, which prohibits prohibited banks from engaging or promoting in cryptocurrencies. So yeah, it's a rock and a hard place. But here we have an instance of, yeah, people are going to use Bitcoin to evade sanctions, or not even evade sanctions. In this case, it's evading the side effects of sanctions on an innocent person who has done nothing wrong, lives in a completely different country, but is of a certain national descent that makes it hard for him to participate in the economy. And he's being told by university that he should, find a way to like, I'm surprised the university wouldn't get in trouble for telling a student to, unless they actually told him like, you have to do this and this with the cash, he wouldn't get in trouble for instructing someone to bring cash over a border. That seems like a bad thing to do.
Well, yeah, I
And
mean, like, all those borders are so scary around that area. I mean, like, the only thing that I was, just like in developments, surrounding this whole situation there in Iran, it's been pretty interesting over the past few days. We've seen that Trump has announced the idea of withdrawing troops from Syria, over the next 30 days, which, that would be that'd be interesting. I know that Russia, Iran, and the U.S. and Turkey are supposed to meet in Geneva sometime soon to discuss these sanctions and everything. So hopefully, like on the on the sidelines, some things will change to where they won't have to be worrisome so much anymore, because it's just been a terrible situation over there for a very long time. So it's good to see positive developments anywhere that could help the situation over there. It's a hornet's nest for sure.
yeah, and just to add, according to the Guardian article, a statement from the University of Reading said, quote, "We recognize that this student is facing exceptional circumstances and are monitoring the situation. We are working with him to try to resolve this issue." So I really hope they do that, because this is pretty unreasonable to ask of someone.
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, hopefully they won't have to go through that process, and everybody can actually move around their value again. I mean, like, these it's just so hurtful whenever they do these sanctions and people aren't actually allowed to store their value or move it around, and there's just such tight control over the whole situation. But hopefully that'll ease up.
And the next one is just kind of, it's not really related to Bitcoin, but it's just an update on a story that I mentioned in a couple of shows a few months ago about Arjen, an information security professional from the Netherlands who had gone missing. It was for a business trip or something like that, and he was supposed to show up for a meeting, and then he didn't show up, and that's how it tipped people off that something was wrong. He went missing sometime in August of this year, and he still hasn't been found after all these months, and it's not even clear if purpose, whether he was forcibly taken, or if he got into some kind of accident during a hiking or kayak trip in the wilderness somewhere in Norway or even a neighboring country, because the search went on across, I think, at least 3 countries in that area around Norway and Germany. And so that's really weird. I mean, one of the things that happened that suggested some kind of kayak accident was that he had I think it was a fold out kayak that someone had seen him carrying around, and it shore like miles and miles away from where he was last seen or suspected to have been. And yesterday, Ancilla, who you may have heard of related to the Pirate Party, she now worked and published a Medium post reflecting on the fact that he has still not been found. And she writes, "He is one of the most kind-hearted, skilled, and smartest people I've ever had the pleasure to get to know. I'm proud to call him a huge influence on my life and mentor in my professional activities. One thing I'm grateful for is that since we met in 2012, we have spent many days together, and I've never let an opportunity go to soak up his extensive knowledge. He lives in my heart and mind. My son has partially been named after Arjen, and I hope I get to pass on the wisdom and ethics he taught me to the next generation too." On all of those who have met him, he made an impact to remember. He really is one of a kind, and him being gone is leaving behind a community. She also noted that friends and family, it sounds like they'll still be continuing the effort to gather information about his whereabouts, meetings, or possible motives if he did decide to disappear himself on purpose. And they'll be distributing stickers about it to spread the word at 35C3 in Leipzig, Germany, which is, as usual, coming up just after there. Maybe stop by and see what's going on.
Yeah, it's a sad story for sure.
Alrighty, though. Next up, something strange happened yesterday. So, Crypto Graffiti created a new work of art. If you give me 1 second, actually put this up on the screen. This actually looks pretty cool. But he decided to do a very strange thing to showcase the possibility of micropayments on the Lightning Network. And instead of doing a bid for the biggest bid winning, it was the smallest bid that would win. And he created this piece, the Black Swan, made from cutting up the little reef and leaf edges from a dollar bill. And, honestly, I think that this is kind of a neat thing. It goes to show, and actually, I was kind of surprised at how many people didn't know that you could actually do very small sub-Satoshi payments on the Lightning Network. But I really think that, I don't know, we're kind of setting ourselves up with things like this to create very bad expectations, in the same way that a lot of rhetoric from morons like Gavin Andreessen and Mike Hearn and Coinbase created bad expectations for what you could do with on-chain transactions. And what I mean by this is, like, yes, you can do sub-Satoshi payments. And yes, that is a very powerful thing and an interesting use case, but it's not economically viable in any rational way unless there is actually an insane amount of volume. If you are literally accepting payments that are thousandths of a cent or tens or hundreds of thousands of a cent, you literally have to do millions of those before you can actually cash that out on chain. And I think that, it's nice to see Lightning thrown out there, and it's nice to actually get attention to it. And as much as I love Crypto Graffiti and their work, like, I really think that we need to step back and learn from what caused horrible misconceptions about what something can and can't do the last time around, and not make those same mistakes this time around. And, like, I want to kind of compare this to Satoshi's place. Like, that as a micropayments use, it was something that generated high volume. Like, even with a Satoshi for a pixel, like, is the way the entire thing was structured is it encouraged very frequent use in high volumes. And that makes sense because you are going to, in some reasonable amount of time, actually cash that out on chain in a cost effective way. Like, you're not going to be able to take 100th of a penny and do anything with that outside of a Lightning channel. Like, to actually close that channel, you are going to lose money. You are not going to get what you've been paid out of that, and you are going to pay more than that's worth to actually close that channel. And it doesn't make economic sense. And I think that as, like, Lightning continues growing and keeps developing, Like, we need to be clear and articulate in explaining these things, and not just doing like shock things to gather people's attention and go, look at this, without really explaining all the other factors involved. Because, you know, like, one of the things that even got crypto graffiti in the space in the first place was micropayments for artists. But the thing is, that's not viable when you're talking crazy small amounts like this, unless you are an insanely popular artist, whatever your medium is, that is getting constant traffic. Like, if the less traffic you get, the more you have to charge things, or you're not going to be able to access that money outside of Lightning. And I think, like, these kinds of things need to be clearly explained, and not just shown without any explanation of the economics behind it, because this is the kind of shit that is going to set up inaccurate expectations, which led to the entire blowback of stupidity that gave us Bitcoin Unlimited, Bitcoin Cash, and all of the stupidity revolving around dead end altcoins we're dealing with right now. It's because people thought one thing, and then when reality hit them in the face, they reacted emotionally and ran off and did something stupid again in a different way. And so, you know, again, like, I'm not saying this as like an attack on crypto graffiti, but like, things like this need to be done in a way that actually articulate the nuances and the reality of something, and not just showing something you can do and leaving a huge gap for people to just completely miss the ball on where that actually fits into reality.
Yeah, man. I mean, like, I was just reading into this as you were talking and stuff. It looks like the final bid on that won it was like 0.00000037 cents. That's insanely small, and it's hard to really even see, how exactly. I mean, like, I'm sure that they'll build out microtransactions that small in the future, but I mean, like, for right now, we're just trying to handle like people's, daily purchases aren't going to be that small. I think that's what we're going for right now. So to go jump to that leap of microtransactions, I mean, like, for sure in the future, but let's get there, in a tenable way.
It's not about like transactions that small. It's just, it doesn't make sense unless you are doing a lot of them. If I pay you 100th of a penny, and the next person to do that doesn't come until tomorrow, you're only doing a transaction like that every day, you will never be able to cash that money out of Lightning. You're just burning it. Like, you need thousands of people a day doing that to make sense. And like, that's what I mean, is like, there is a use case for one thing, and that doesn't make sense in other situations, or even in just other volumes. And like, that's something people need to understand when they start looking at how they want to use micropayments with Lightning.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this infrastructure is kind of being the idea of being able to do sub-Satoshi amounts on the Lightning Network, is that people anticipate that at some point the Bitcoin price will rise high enough that the lowest unit, obviously for a regular Bitcoin transaction, is a Satoshi. And so if the price goes high enough, eventually maybe a Satoshi worth a lot of money. And that would mean, let's say a Satoshi becomes $5. That means you can't do a transaction that's $1, because the largest value amount that you can do is a $5 one Satoshi payment. So I mean, I think a lot of this is just building on, very early infrastructure, anticipating that, the price might, I don't know exactly what the price would have to be to get calculated right now, but I assume that that's why they're talking about it now, because maybe a lot of people are thinking about that and they don't know that the Lightning Network can solve that problem already by allowing you to do smaller payments than 1 Satoshi.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Just like on that
Mhm.
price rise. Sorry, go ahead, man.
Yeah, but it's like, again, like it's just you need to temper expectations, because again, this is exactly how we got into the situation where we had to deal with all the stupid bullshit we have over the last 2 years. You had morons like Roger just going, look, you just scan it and it's instantly paid. And then reality happened. And people went, what the fuck? It's not going through. It's not instantly paid. And then you had a bunch of backlash and reaction to that went in a completely non-constructive direction. And I'm just saying, like, they not repeating those mistakes with Lightning, I think, is really important, or we're going to have the exact same kind of shit repeat itself. Like, that's just human nature.
Yeah, it should definitely be made clear that, when we say that Lightning can do sub Satoshis, that you can do that within the Lightning Network and only within the Lightning Network, and you have to settle at an amount that is at least 1 Satoshi, if not more, depending on the fee estimation.
Well, it's not, it's greatly more than a Satoshi because we have the dust limit. But my point is, like, I don't want to see somebody like go put a bunch of time and their effort into doing something and then trying to price something at rates like this and then getting no traffic and literally having invested all of this time to literally just have money that they'll never be able to collect. But
I'm sorry. I'm just like, I'm thinking of interesting ideas for it, but yeah, it's like, it's hard to say, like, it's, it's something that, we can necessarily build out all that stuff right now. It's like, we need slow development first and not just like, I don't know, move that quick to those things. I mean, that's a large scale.
alrighty, though. Next up, we have a little bit of an update with what's going on with Bitmain and the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And not just Bitmain, also Canon and eBay. So somebody anonymously has reached out to Coinbase. I'm sorry, Coinbase. Wow. CoinDesk to discuss the pending Bitmain application for HKEX. And pretty much they're saying that this is something that the exchange is very hesitant to go forward with. And a big part of the reason is just the overall volatility of the space and how that affects the bottom line of a mining company. And this is, again, particularly regarding Bitmain, but not just Bitmain. This is also their attitude towards Canon and eBay. And Canon has already had their application lapse. It was filed in May. And eBay is, I think, 2 weeks away from their application lapsing, while Bitmain, I think, isn't until February or March that their application would lapse. But part of the big hesitancy here is they don't want to go forward and approve a mining company listing and then effectively have the company go under and go bankrupt after having been listed on the exchange. Like, they don't want to be the first exchange to do that and then effectively screw investors when the company goes under, just due to the inherent volatility of the crypto market overall. And I mean, this really makes sense because the whole reason that you have these kinds of application processes and gatekeepers for a stock exchange like this is they're ostensibly there to protect retail investors. They're there to make sure that you don't have all kinds of reckless, unsustainable nonsense that people dump their money into and then it just goes under and everybody loses everything they invested. And they're pretty much kind of using this bear market we're in right now as an excuse to continue putting off actually having a hearing for Bitmain's application. And really the two things that they look at is overall the stability of the market that they're involved in and the sustainability of the business. And obviously, the market overall is heavily volatile. And specifically with Bitmain, given their, where do we start? They dumped all of their Bitcoin. They kept a shit ton of their assets in crypto instead of liquidating to cash for operating expenditures. They have a shit ton of obsolete hardware unsold that they're sitting on. So most of their capital is actually in different assets that are rapidly depreciating. So it's not just their revenue in terms of the overall market that's a question, it's the literal assets of the company. And part of the reason that part of the justification for why this isn't an issue from these mining companies, particularly Bitmain's stance, is they keep claiming, and all of these companies have been using this argument with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, that they're branching out and diversifying into ASICs for AI. And according to this anonymous source at the exchange, the regulators at the exchange are not really buying this argument and still suspect, in my opinion, quite accurately, that all of these companies depend almost entirely on crypto mining operations for most of their revenue still. And so really looking at all of this, like, it seems very highly unlikely that any of these IPOs are going to go through. And it seems like the exchange is kind of pretty much trying to just let the application lapse, at which point Bitmain would have to refile and go through this process all over again, and are trying to kind of prevent this listing from happening despite having no real concrete argument overall as to why they shouldn't. It's mostly just hesitancy about letting one of these companies go through, and then the potential that it goes under and takes all of it, anybody who invests in it, money with them. And I think that argument specifically goes for Bitmain more than eBay and Canon, given just the wild, reckless strategy they've taken over the last year in terms of exactly how they've allocated their capital.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some speculation on Twitter about these leaks that we're getting about all these stories being just another one of those conspiracies to badmouth, Bitmain. But I mean, like stories like these, it kind of shows, that yeah, there's some truth, and we see it just in, like you're saying, with their different holdings that have been declared, and that we've seen all these things moving down in price, and as far as just getting mining contracts in China and the way that mining in Inner Mongolia and all that stuff has sort of just changed the way that they're trying to fight to find their space. And I mean, it's almost just like I don't want to say too late, but I mean maybe. Sorry.
Well, it's called karma. On the other side of the world, though, there is some interesting developments going on for Liquid. So, IT consulting firm in Switzerland, Inacta AG, has been developing a token platform, effectively to it's called Token Gate, to issue digital assets, in their words, that are fully compliant with laws and regulations. And Inacta has just integrated support for Liquid. And so I think this is really, we've had the Swiss Stock Exchange 6 announced when Liquid launched as one of the federators for the chain. But this, I think, is the next step forward that shows, at least in this one jurisdiction, which has been one of the most ICO-friendly jurisdictions in the world since really the entire mania took off, that they're really starting to look at Liquid as an alternative for raising capital. And I think this shows, at least in Switzerland, that a lot of the players over there are starting to kind of realize that the entire narrative of, a utility token and integration with smart contracts and dApps and blah, blah, blah is really just a bunch of hot air. And then when it really comes down to it at the end of the day, this is just another mechanism for either raising capital or issuing equity. And so it makes sense to do so on a platform that doesn't have all of the attack surfaces and nonsense that comes along with it on Ethereum. And I've been looking at Liquid for quite a while now and thinking that this is inevitably one of the big use cases that's really going to pick up with it. Like, it's obviously at the core for arbitrage with Bitcoin and trying to improve the liquidity pools there. But the more that stock exchanges around the world start looking at tokenizing things like equity, shares, bonds, which are really some of the only things out there that make sense in terms of tokenizing. I mean, there are other forms of value that could benefit from a value transfer mechanism that don't directly compete with something like a money. Like, the source of their value is not a competition with Bitcoin. It is a more narrow, trust related value derived from a specific entity or entities. And Liquid can not only fulfill that kind of arbitrage mechanism for things like this, but I think inevitably down the line, Liquid could itself become a sort of exchange. Like, it's the Bitcoin code base. It supports multiple assets. It supports atomic swaps, ostensibly. All of this can be done privately. You can guarantee the integrity of exchanges. And we could potentially see Liquid become a proper exchange itself in a kind of semantic sort of way for these kinds of, securities tokens. And I think the fact that Switzerland, a company from Switzerland, is directly looking at integrating Liquid for that specific purpose, while one of their major stock exchange is getting on board with the platform overall, that there are definitely big players in the finance world kind of looking at that possibility and slowly starting to build things out to actually realize it.
Yeah, man. I mean, like, I'm interested to follow these developments on Liquid. I mean, that's just one of those things for a long time where people have been like, well, how are we going to do this on Bitcoin or that on Bitcoin? And this idea of side chains and how exactly that's going to be implemented and what it's going to do. And, Liquid being the first real commercial side chain being developed and, by, people that have worked in Bitcoin for a long time. It's one of those where, we're seeing this launch of all these different stable coins, and it's one of those things where they're all trying to be these liquidity pool, go between arbitrage tokens or, coins. And I mean, like, a lot of them have like Ethereum backend and a lot of different attack surfaces that are just not good. I mean, and so I mean, like, I'm really excited to see Liquid move forward and like with an exchange like HKEX out of Switzerland. I mean, I know that they've been in talks with a lot of these different exchanges that have a lot of the liquidity, and so it would be really interesting to just see that completely kind of build out and the possibilities there. And so yeah, it's a good development for sure. I mean, like, all this stuff with Blockstream is pretty crazy, but I mean, they've been working in this space for a long time. They kind of see the roadmap and how it really needs to fit together. And so it's good to keep seeing these developments moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, bringing those kinds of assets to Liquid is just fusing the crypto ecosystem and the legacy ecosystem at a point where it actually makes sense instead of just this kind of nonsensical bullshit you hear from like Coinbase or Consensus, like tokenize everything. Like, no, but there are some things that actually do make sense to tokenize. All right. So next up, speaking of idiots, Vitalik recently decided to throw away $300,000 in Ethereum to 3 ETH startups on Twitter. Just sent 1,000 ETH. YOLO! And honestly, I think there's a few issues with this, really. I mean, pretty much he gave them gave 1,000 ETH grants to each of the companies, Prismatic Labs, ChainSafe Systems, and Sigma Prime. Prismatic and Sigma Prime are both working on Ethereum 2.0. Or I'm sorry, Prismatic and ChainSafe are both working on, eyes. Sigma Prime and ChainSafe are working on Ethereum 2.0 clients, and Prismatic Labs is ostensibly working on scalability research. And the interesting thing here is both Prismatic Labs and Sigma Prime have both received Ethereum Foundation grants before. Prismatic Lab, one for $500,000 and $100,000, and Sigma Prime, $150,000. And these were all granted this year. So Sigma Prime and Prismatic got 2 of these grants this October, and Prismatic got their first in March. And so 2 of the companies that he made a big deal, kind of a publicity stunt on Twitter of giving money in the bear market, have already been receiving money from the Ethereum Foundation. And so really this is not in any way just kind of tossing money to projects that are underfunded. This is, at least in 2 of these companies' cases, an instance of them giving more money to something they've already invested in. Because if the project goes under, then their initial grant investments were for nothing. So really, this is in no way Vitalik playing Mr. Charitable during the holidays. This is him making sure that he already hasn't wasted money on previous investments. And 2 is just unbelievable given the entire Ethereum giveaway scam on Twitter and the fact that his name is literally non-giver of ETH. That he's just tweeting out about sending Ethereum to projects on Twitter. Like, that's not going to give more ammunition and shit to point to for scammers. I mean, the amount of stupidity there is fucking unbelievable.
Well, to be fair, I think it also at one point he had in his Twitter bio that he was not he did not, or he might have tweeted or had it in his bio that he would not be involved with or advise on any ICOs, and then he supported Omisgo, or however you pronounce it. So yeah, he says a lot of things and there are always exceptions. There's always a 20% exception. Exactly. I find it amazing. I'm still getting replies to that tweet that I made to him about the 80% consent thing. It's really
because
funny.
we keep going back and trolling him to see if he'll respond.
I don't think he will. He's probably muted it by now.
Yeah, it's funny for sure. I mean, like, I didn't even think about that. Like, the fact that he gave away a bunch of ETH and he still got Vitalik, like, non-giver of ETH on his name. That's that's really kind of funny, man. Like, but yeah, it just does seem kind of like, you could help these projects behind the scenes. I mean, you're already, funding 2 of them with the foundation. Like, you could have just increased funding and everything. So what's the big move behind just like announcing it on Twitter and being like, hey, here's 1,000 ETH. Like, we're going to help this project out. Sounds like, I don't know really what the motive is, but it just sounds like it didn't have to be so public.
Yeah, anyway, fuck Vitalik trying to create this nonsense image of Mr. Charitable. No, you're not. You're making sure previous investments weren't wasted money. In other news, Blythe Masters is stepping down as chief executive of Digital Assets Holding, the JP Morgan spinoff, to concentrate on blockchain technology. And there is a huge song and dance going on about how this in no way is going to affect the future of blockchain, with the Australian Stock Exchange reiterating that they are still working to integrate blockchain systems with digital assets to use as a backend for their stock exchange. But really, I think the reality here, when you read between the lines, is why would she be stepping down, given that she is one of the earliest members of the banking system that really kind of threw her hat in the ring regarding blockchain and cryptocurrencies, if this wasn't looking like a dead end? And I mean, how long ago was it? I think maybe a few weeks that 50% of blockchain projects have failed to develop a working product, despite the fact that these companies trying to push these things have literally been around for 3 to 4 to 5 years, depending on which one you're talking about at this point. But yeah, I mean, they can spin all the headlines that they want, but all I see from this is the era of blockchain, not Bitcoin, is quietly coming to a close after people have dumped hundreds of millions of dollars into it and produced absolutely nothing working in the process.
Yeah, man, I really hope so. I mean, you think you would see that with, it seems like JP Morgan has been one of those guys that really championing that blockchain, not Bitcoin. And, Jamie Dimon always yelling at Bitcoin, saying it's a fraud and, the real technology is blockchain. But I mean, honestly, I've been in these discussions here where blockchain is huge. And it does seem like a lot of people are coming to the realization that, these chains are not necessary, we don't need to tokenize all the things. Like, I mean, there is like still a good level of misunderstandings about the way it works, but I'm telling you, I've been seeing more and more of like people just like kind of admitting that like the way that the roadmaps are going, it's very similar, and people just copycatting one another, and it's really about the value of the network effects and how do you get those. And so I mean, people are starting to come to understandings about it, but yeah, JP Morgan's just kind of been in all the wrong places with the space. So yeah, maybe this is a sign that all that's coming to an end, and we don't have to hear so much about from them anymore.
And next up, third to last, JP Morgan is claiming that the Bitcoin bear market is scaring off institutional investors. This I find very hard to believe. And one of the things they're specifically pointing at is that miners are starting to turn off because it's becoming unprofitable to mine. And I mean, really, like, anybody who understands this ecosystems knows shit. That's the entire way that this system was designed, so that it would continue to function regardless of whether the price swung wildly up or wildly down. But I just absolutely do not buy this whatsoever, given people like Nova or Mike Novogratz are still all in, still developing businesses in this space. The fact that you actually had backed push back their launch until January because of so much demand for things in this ecosystem, that you literally have, as we covered the last episode, a major stock exchange in Germany building out Bitcoin products now. Like, this is like a bank like this saying that institutional money is backing off. You're full of shit. And here's really what I think any basis in reality to this should be succinctly boiled down to. A bunch of hedge fund managers that FOMO'd in at the top last holiday season are wrecked and closing down their hedge funds. And that in no way means that institutional investors are being scared off from Bitcoin. That means that all of the short-sighted idiots who thought that the chart is going up, so it will continue to go up forever, had their ass handed to them and now have to walk away. In other words, the dumb money got burnt out. And really, to try to project from that all investors in that kind of value scale are not interested in the space anymore, like, who the fuck do you think you're kidding, JP Morgan?
Yeah, man, I guess I'd take that back. Obviously, they're going to continue spreading some FUD about the space. Yeah, I mean, like, I guess, what's her name? Blythe again, stepping away. I mean, it's one of those where I guess you got to put out some FUD with that kind of story. And yeah, like you're saying, I mean, like we did the story last week on that hedge fund. What is it, Pantera? Or I can't remember which hedge fund it was, where it was like a good percentage of the assets, probably would be labeled unregistered securities, and all sorts of troubles that direction. So I mean, I guess you could take that kind of news and run with it and say this is scaring away institutional investors. But the smart person would look at, the SIX exchange, the German Solaris Bank setting up that Bitcoin product, NASDAQ with backed, and ICE. And I mean, it's just, this is like taking the little, they're always going to spread FUD. So there goes that idea that maybe JP Morgan would just shut up.
Wait, is digital asset, is that connected? Because I only see that she used to work at JP Morgan and then she went to digital asset. So
Right.
are they?
It's a
Is
bunch
it-
of ex-JP Morgan people who left to go found Digital Asset Holdings.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. Those digital assets aren't working out.
Alrighty, though. 2 left to go. And these, I think, are just epically priceless. So, how long has the Tether FUD narrative been going on now? What is it, a year and a half, 2 years?
I think since April 2017, something like that.
So, yeah, about a year and a half. Well, Bloomberg has recently written a piece after getting a hold of banking details and reports from Noble Bank that show more detail than the reports that Tether has published before. That they think that Tether is actually fully backed by cash reserves in the bank. And in order to state this, looked at all of the different balance reports that Tether has posted before with attestations from either auditing firms or lawyers claiming that this money is here in the bank right now. Looked at further details provided by Noble Bank, verifying the audacity of those reports, as well as went back and looked at a number of transfers from Noble Bank to Bitfinex's account, matching them to transactions of Tether on the Bitcoin blockchain, showing that in each of these cases, transfers of Tether to Tether, a Tether address, resulted in an equal amount of money being wired from Tether's bank account to Bitfinex's bank account. And after going through all of this information, have decided that it's very likely that they are fully backed. But, hold on, guys. We're not done yet, because there's still the potential that Tether was used to manipulate the Bitcoin markets. Because, all right, we can't keep the nonsense going now that we've had much more details provided to us by the bank itself showing that they actually had the funds. But people taking those funds that actually existed and buying Bitcoin with them, that could still constitute market manipulation, people. That could still be non-organic, genuine activity artificially inflating the Bitcoin market price. So, in the interest of time, should I dive into the next story that also very tightly relates to this one? I think I will. So there is a group, the Blockchain Transparency Institute, that has been doing a good amount of work for the past couple of months, trying to analyze trading activity on different exchanges, and even going so far as to be looking at exchanges security setups to kind of report on and rate different exchanges. And after an initial report last month, they have refined their methodologies and gone and done another report to try and discover wash trading on Bitcoin exchanges in the ecosystem. And while they haven't given out the exact metrics and data that they're looking at, because what they're effectively doing is analyzing trading activity to find patterns of bot trading, they've put out their findings. And the interesting thing here, drum roll, what are the two exchanges that are not wash trading, that by their metrics and methodologies are 100% real volume? Bitfinex and Binance. The two exchanges that everybody's constantly screaming are wash trading and manipulating the market. And the only other one to be 100% real volume by their study is a exchange called Liquid, nothing to do with Blockstream or the sidechain in Japan. But the rest of their findings show exchanges such as HKEX with their BTC USDT trading pair, only 11% of the volume is not wash trading, according to. In the case of BTC and Huobi, the USDT volume against BTC, only 25% of it is not wash trading. So guys, holy shit, guys, the exchange that the US government, that the mainstream media, that deranged, obviously paid sock puppets in our ecosystem, that everybody and their mom who doesn't like cryptocurrency has been screaming are printing money out of thin air and wildly manipulating the entire market, have been found to have all of the actual money backing Tether in the bank, and to be literally one of the only exchanges in the entire ecosystem that were studied to not in any way manipulate their order books or wash trade. Aren't those guys in the mainstream so fucking smart? Aren't they so astute with their accusations, guys?
And now we cut to Bitfinex's Twitter account where he is still tweeting about spoofing.
You know, I don't think those guys will ever be like completely satisfied. There's just like a large contingent out there with the altcoinery that is just like, you know, if it's not the Blockstream conspiracy, it's the Tether conspiracy. So like these are the two that will keep these, you know, people, you know, preaching from the rooftops that they should be in whatever coin. And yeah, it really is interesting to see that Bitfinex and Binance were the two that just like 100% were not wash trading. I mean, like that's just that's crazy. But I mean, like, you know, that's like we were talking about for a long time that, you know, like these exchanges and Tether, and I mean, like there just hasn't been anything to really suggest that any of this information is true. And so it's good to get you know, some facts coming out that are showing like, you know, this volume is real, it's there, it's backed up. And I think according to the report I read, there was like even more in reserve than the printed supply, which I know that the first audit of, I think it was the Gemini dollar, there was more printed than in reserve. So, I mean, like, you know, they're in a better spot than these other guys. And I mean, like, there's just, it's one of these where, you know, I think we're always going to have like a little bit of these, you know, oh, well, you should worry about this, you know, from the past, and it's just going to be one of those that follows us. It's people are still going to bring up, even though the information is there for them.
That's just like, how far do we have to go before they just give up? Like, this is point blank. The US government does not like the biggest Bitcoin exchange in terms of spot markets being a company that for all intents and purposes, is outside of their jurisdiction, outside of their control, will not just roll over like a puppy dog and do whatever the fuck they tell them to. So they fabricate bullshit. They pay people to spread bullshit all over social media. They pay journalists to echo and report on baseless bullshit. Well, you know what? It's time to fucking give up, because nobody except deranged lunatics and naive idiots are buying it anymore. You are fading into irrelevance. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, Bitfinex.
But on that
Time to
note,
learn a gravity lesson.
on that note, though, I think that puts us at the final thoughts for the day.
All right. Well, you're getting some links up or stuff. Yeah, I'll just like go into what I've mentioned a little bit about this. Last night we had a Bitcoin engineering meetup, and there was a winter crypto party just around the corner afterwards, where a lot of the blockchain guys were from here in town. And yeah, we might be in a bear market, but it was really good to see. Like, yeah, it was just 3 of us at the Bitcoin meetup where we were talking about, the nuts and bolts about Bitcoin and kind of getting into the possibilities. But it was a real interesting discussion, and it's a lot greater than it was, at the earlier time in the year. I mean, like, just kind of getting like more intriguing discussion. And at the blockchain meetup, it's interesting to see a lot of these people, kind of coming around and starting to understand the way that the ecosystem works. And, it's just a lot of fun out here. But I mean, it's interesting that a lot of Casa Hodl guys were there. And, they tried to do a gimmick where, you could only use crypto to buy your drinks. And they were calling it a cypherpunk speakeasy. But the way that it was set up was, you could either trade some Bitcoin or Litecoin or cash for some token they had called DAI-X. And they basically had QR codes set up on the bar. And right whenever we walked in there's all these people at the bar bumbling with their phones trying to get this thing to work. And, I went up there with some fiat and was like, somebody buy me a drink with that they've already gotten. I'm not going to try and participate in this like awkward phase of trying to just get a drink. And so luckily somebody did get me a drink, and I talked to the bartender for a second, and she was talking to that, it's kind of upsetting because bartenders, usually deal with tips, and that relies on a large volume of transactions and people being able to come and go really quickly. And they had the tip built into the transaction. And, I looked over, there wasn't much in the tip jar, but I mean, like, that changed. Everybody, I think, kind of started actually seeing that, the bartender really did need some tips on this. Like, you can't just, expect 1 to 2 customers every 10 minutes to be giving that person the type of funding they need to sustain themselves as a job. But I mean, like, it got even worse than that. Some of the Bitcoiners that were there with us, Blockbane was saying in the Mumble this morning about how, he tried to go through this onboarding process and store his private keys locally there on the phone, but they just like immediately went away. And the guy that helped him get all set up was like, oh, I'll just buy your beer. And it was just it was a real headache situation seeing that. But I think it's, like I'm saying, a lot of people are coming around. It was a good point of discussion where, we were having all these sidebars after the main discussion. And we were talking about this where it's like, yeah, but we need it to be easy. We can't have a person spending all this time trying to onboard on your coin. And then when they get there, it's this complicated process that makes the whole transaction, as far as like having a bartender, why would a bartender want to be there if they can't get the amount of tips that they would expect? So, but all that said, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Like, I really do kind of, enjoy the community around here and, getting to know everyone. And, like I've said before, I know there's a lot of people kind of from around the country and around the world listening. I mean, Denver is an international airport, and there's usually a Bitcoin and beer meetup going on there in Denver, or or a Boulder Valley Bitcoin meetup, or a lot of meetups, and a lot of people are active, even though it's still, one of these times that people say, it's real quiet and the industry might just die off or something. But, I see it here. It's booming, and it's a lot of fun. So, appreciate the Winter Crypto Party and the guys that came out to discuss, the mechanics behind Bitcoin. It was good night.
You can go.
So the first one is just a small update on something related to the case with Assange, where a journalist, I think Stefania, she's a Spanish name. She won an appeal against the Metropolitan Police in the UK, refusing to give her access to I think it was Julian Assange and Sarah Harrison and one other person. Let me check the tweet really quick. They don't mention it in that tweet, but I know it was definitely Julian Assange and Sarah Harrison, but I think it was 3 individuals total. And that's good. They won the appeal. And I believe the lawyers that helped it was this woman named and then one of the WikiLeaks lawyers, which is Jen Robinson. So that's because we might get some more documents.
Next.
And then the second thing is a small update on more consensus layoffs. And this, people are already saying this when they announced it. Initially, Consensus was saying they would only be laying off about 13% of its staff. That's probably going to be a much bigger number. There are still layoffs that are not even being announced. As is article, office is empty. People are only finding out who's getting fired. Send Slack messages and they're not there. Create a list of the projects that are being spun out, which is spun out or spin off is their euphemism for firing someone, or send out anything in writing because they're afraid of everything going to the press. Yeah, they're having a fun time.
Not that fun. Imagine.
And I should also note, Civil has announced that they will be doing their second-ish token salary, but it's going to be a limited sale, which means there is no specified date when it's going to happen, which, considering that a lot of these ICOs, sold out within seconds, in the last 2 years, the fact that you would have to have an unlimited deadline in your sale means you basically won't have a lot of interest, or it will be very erratic interest. So I should also note that they are still one of the projects that is supposedly being supported by Consensus, and yet they are not on the list of spokes that Consensus is certain they will be keeping. So I don't know if that means that, let's see what they list. I think they have, obviously, MetaMask, because that's a big thing in Ethereum. There's Infura, obviously, because Infura is hosting everything. Pegasus, which is an enterprise grade blockchain. Alethio, which is a blockchain network analysis tool. Kaleido, which is about bringing businesses together through blockchain to create more meaningful and beautiful. And Truffle, a smart contract service. So I don't see Civil listed there. Doesn't mean they've gotten chopped, but high chance they could get chopped. Yeah. The fact that they think that they're in a good position to launch after the absolute failure of their first one, not such good prospects.
Yeah, I could tell you, like we're saying, there's a lot of these guys around here, and you can obviously notice some restructuring going on, and some people not really with smiles on their faces anymore or something like that. But at the same time, there are some guys who their projects are still working, and they're going forward, and we'll see how it goes. But you can really tell that there is some shifts going on in the background where guys that were working for this company all of a sudden are working for that company, and just a lot of that going on.
All right. And my final thought is everybody go find my tone meme and meme tone vase. Help me meme some sense into him with this stupidity about Coinbase reporting withdrawals as sales making sense. And on that note, everybody, hope you all have a nice holiday, and we will see you soon. Toodaloo.
Later, everyone.